We're going to talk about 10 competencies.
These are all things you're constantly growing in.
Because I love the people that Jesus loves, I'm going to go out and do this really uncomfortable thing.
You have got to be able to put together a compelling vision for the beauty of the congregation.
Are you able to kind of look into the future and say, well, what is possible?
Welcome to the Lutheran Church Planter, a podcast exploring the theology, philosophy, and practice of planting new Lutheran congregations. I'm your host, Andy Coyle, a church planter and director of home missions for the Association of Free Lutheran Congregations, joined by my co-host, Pastor Matthew Ballman, church planter down in San Antonio, Texas, Trinity. Check it out. Well, today we are going to finish this little micro sort of arc episodes on looking at spiritual leadership. You know, the whole season is blueprints of starting congregation. Obviously, leadership is a huge part in that. So we've kind of broke it down into the 4 C's. So we spent some time looking at the calling, just like, has God called me? And how do we confirm that? Check that episode out. We looked at character, clearly looking at the way the Bible, it lays out the scriptural qualifications for spiritual leadership. This is an important thing. And then we looked at chemistry and just looking at like the theological fit, the chemistry, the philosophy, chemistry, the cultural fit within a congregation, a super, super important idea as we think of ministry. And today we're going to look at the final one, and that is competency. We're going to be looking at like wiring and gifting. How has God built me, essentially? It's a super important point as we look at pastoring in general. And again, as we've gone through all these, this is related to all pastors, and yet there will be specific application for planting in the planting context. So I think hopefully this will be important for you too as you listen and wrestle through these things. A really important point again is that all these C's are designed to work together. You don't want to take one out of it, right? Calling is important, character, chemistry, competency. It's really, really key together. We don't want to rush the process. Our goal, again, within home missions, hopefully the goal for all church planting networks is to plant a strong, healthy, theologically sound congregations that's going to last more than 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It's going to last generations, right? That's our goal, Lord willing. And so to do that, we believe that God, as we see in Scripture, specifically builds men to shepherd congregations, right? To pastor churches. And God has like built people that are different, right? We see that in the Scriptures. We see the giftings of Paul, and we see James, and we see others that are Timothy, for example. And so that's what we're going to be kind of getting at today is just like, okay, so what are some of those differences within giftings, and how does that play out within a congregation? So I don't know if you remember, years ago, back with the floppy disks, playing that awesome game called Oregon Trail, right? And everybody played it growing up, and it was always fun. You always were that pioneer, and you were progressing west, and you dealt with the adventures and the risks and all that kind of stuff. But that was that heart for adventure to go out and try something new and get out to the West Coast, right? As we talk about this today, I want to sort of, with that in the background, maybe being sort of framing the conversation into sort of categories of people. And sometimes it's been said that way. There are 2 types of people in this life. You've got settlers and you've got pioneers. And those words, are not perfect, but they do capture like the idea here. They paint a picture. As we think of settlers in our minds, right? Settlers are those that, lay down roots. They develop civilization. They build a life and they develop there. Pioneers, they're the ones that venture into the unknown. They take risks, right? There are people in life that love to just go out and start businesses. And there are others that want to work in businesses and develop those businesses. So we kind of just know that there are different types of people, right? And it's funny, sometimes these different types of people can drive each other crazy. Sometimes settlers can say, man, what's wrong with that pioneer guy there? Why can't he just settle down? And the pioneers can say to the settlers, what's wrong with that guy? How can he be so satisfied in the boring and predictable thing, And so it's the way that we sometimes interact with these categories. It's just really interesting. It's a fact of life. So a long time ago, back when I was still studying, in college and seminary, my wife and I would spend our summers over in Eastern Europe, and we would work with this organization called the East European Mission Network, and now it's called Sun Ministry. But we would travel with Pastor Bill Moberly, really good friend of ours. And I remember a specific conversation in driving through the hills of Poland in between camps. And he was talking about how he knew that he was built as a trailblazer, or, again, pioneer, but a trailblazer. It's like he's always passionate about, taking risks and starting things and trying things. And that had just been a pattern of his life. And I saw that just firsthand. It was enfleshed right before me of a dear friend that was so gifted in these areas. And I never really thought about it in that way before. And I really never had thought about that all through seminary. We never talked about it in seminary. I didn't really realize it until I actually got into ministry of, okay, maybe I am built in a certain way that is maybe different. And I started to be able to say, okay, man, that pastor, oh, he is such a gifted pastor, and he is a shepherd, and he has faithfully served and developed that congregation for years. And then there's this pastor that has just taken the risk and started something from nothing. And it's okay to talk that way. I think we need to be better at just recognizing that God designs people to do ministries. Pastors are built different. It shouldn't be controversial. It shouldn't be surprising. Now, I think it's important to note that, not everybody is 100% a pioneer or 100% a settler. Those are just categories, right? It gives us language to kind of have a discussion. But as research does show that the majority of pastors are more wired as just your gracious shepherd, your settler. They're wired to nurture and to stabilize and to organize and to just care for people. And these are so, so important within developing a healthy, vibrant congregation. They're crucial, right? Then there are a group of pastors that are built not really as settlers, but they're built to take risks. They're built to be, more men of vision and comfortable operating with just a ton of unknowns. They're built to be missionaries. They're built to be church planters. And history shows the wisdom of thinking through this a little bit, because some start and others are built to develop. We do nobody a favor to put them in the wrong spot. We're going to be talking about that later on as well, but we've seen it. We've seen wonderful, just super gifted pastors getting completely burned out, being put in the wrong place because their gifts are not being nurtured. And so this is an important thing. This is the why, right? We want to make sure that we put our pastors in the right place that God has built them for, right? And we need each other. The frontier, Western pioneer, as they went out west, they needed people to follow them and to develop in civilization, right? Otherwise, we don't have the wonderful cities that would exist today. The settlers needed pioneers to spread that civilization, to capture new ground, right? So both are needed. Paul captures that in 1 Corinthians 3. He said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but God gives the growth. And that's what we believe. It's like, no matter, as we talk about this, like, we're not elevating one over the other. We're not saying one is more important or necessary. Both are needed. Both are beautifully designed by God to nurture the body of Christ and to spread mission in the world. And yet God uses those different giftings at different times. So we're going to talk about competency today. All right, Matt, that was a long introduction. But why don't you bring us into that concept of competency and maybe introduce some of those categories for us?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent introduction. Really helpful framing it. As we talked about the last couple episodes, and everything we're going to talk about here comes from a couple things. One, it comes from observational studies. So people have done actually studies over the last 40, 50, 60 years on what are the factors that lead to successful, healthy church plants. Okay, so part of what we're talking about is coming from those studies. So saying, here are our factors. Are they absolutely necessary in every single case? No. But as a general rule, these are the strengths that are needed to lead to a healthy, vibrant church. Okay, but we're also, with that, we're assuming that in mind is there's only one type of pastor in the sense of like the biblical qualifications, things,
right.
Like the virtue and the character and the love, the shepherding, the teaching, the preaching, the list that we've gone through already. These, we are assuming those things. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're not talking about a different category of like, these are like super pastors or something. No, all pastors are required to have those biblical qualifications. What we're talking about here are things that, some people talk about spiritual gifting. That's part of it. But part of it is when a person becomes a Christian, that their personality traits the way they look at the world and interact and operate becomes sanctified. We refer to that as like a sanctified gifting. And that's really what we're talking about here is these innate personality traits, the way the person approaches the world, that church planting will be in some ways more effective when we get individuals that have that certain kind of wiring within them. So we're going to talk about 10 competencies. There could be more, there could be less. You could talk about these in different ways. These are not, here are absolutely every single one of these, right? Has to be said in this way. So as we approach this list, what's helpful to think about is using this as a placeholder to think about how is this gift being exercised in a kind of missionary context or church planting context or revitalizing context. You'll see it play out in different ways. So we have 10 of them here, a little bit of overlap between some of them, but these are all really, really, really helpful in thinking about your gifting and how you can even grow in this gifting.
Yeah.
So Andy, what's the first one? What would you say?
All right.
And these are not going to be in any one order of importance either. Right. That's important to say.
Yeah, and I think also, you mentioned it, the idea of growing in these. These are not like you just wake up and boom, you're a 10 out of 10 kind of a thing. These are all things you're constantly growing in, and yet, obviously, again, as we talk about wiring, some just have innately maybe more giftings than others. First one is intrinsically motivated. So in other words, what we're talking about is just a natural self-starter, right? So a person that doesn't have to be told or whatever, just boom, he goes after things. He's constantly pursuing excellence, and he's just hard work, right? Determination. So, but think that idea of like self-starter, because again, church planting, you don't have systems, you don't have anything. You got to build it. You don't have this awesome organizational structure. You don't have 50 years of institutional memory. You don't have any of that kind of stuff. You got to go and you got to build it. And so that takes a lot of work. It takes time. It takes trial and error. Just a lot of stuff. So
how would I know? How would I know if I am intrinsically motivated? What would be a question to kind of help a person assess?
Yeah.
Kind of figure out where they're at on that.
Well, maybe ask your wife. I mean, no, I think it's important to find out from people around you. Like, I think you look at your history. And I know there's a lot we're going to be talking about assessment later, but I think there are some just basic things to know, to ask the people around you that know you, like, and look at your track record is a part of it. I mean, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that track record is a huge thing of like, sometimes we'll do this in assessment, like, hey, share 3 programs or ministries that you started and that you got up and operating. Yeah. And that will kind of get people thinking, because like, oh man, I can't think of anything that I've started or gotten up and operating. That's like, oh, okay, well, maybe you're not really high on this scale. Okay, that's good to know. Or others are like, man, in the last year, I can tell you, 5, 6, 7 things that I dreamed up. I had this idea. I got people on board. We built it. We executed on it. And, maybe they're not all operating today still, but we tried them, right? That's another interesting thing with that is like, it doesn't always have to be successful, but are you thinking in that way of starting new things and having that internal motivation to get out there and do it, or waiting for someone to tell you what to do?
Right. And I think, and even maybe another way to capture this is, I can think of a number of people in the Shiloh, the church where I was planting, that could just take something and run with it and you don't have to worry about it. And then I can think of others that needed like, okay, what exactly do I need to do? And what are the 8 things that, if you give me the things that I need to do, then I can work with it. And so I think that's another way to look at it is like, do I need a packaged thing to operate in? And if I have that, man, I'm good to go and I'm fine. If you're asking me to create something from nothing and navigate, and I don't want to do that. It paralyzes you. So does structure and systems like free you, or do they paralyze you? Kind of a thing. Anyway, so self-starter. Number 2, stubborn resilience. Now, what's up with that, Matt? Why would that be a key thing?
Yeah, what is stubborn resilience? Again, say it in many ways. You can say grit is one of the ways I often talk about it. A perseverance, not to give up. A deep kind of conviction and just default to grind when things are really hard. This is important because church planting is hard. We've talked about that a lot. There's a lot of difficulties to it. There's a lot of situations where you don't know how it's going to turn out. And a lot of it's kind of riding on, how hard are you willing to work in this or not? And again, we recognize God builds the church, but he always uses means, right? And often the degree to which we are willing to grind is some indicator of where the ministry is going to go, the level of sacrifice that we're willing to make. But within church planting, especially the first couple years,
Right.
once you get past that initial, say, 4, 5, 6 years of a church plant, and every story is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Some just blow up in a year or two, and they have great systems all in place. Really quickly, God brings a lot of amazing leaders. Others, it's a little bit slower, and that's most of them are much slower.
Yeah.
And what that means is, especially early on, if you're expecting your church just to take off and in a year or 2 or 3, you're going to have 100 people and all these systems. If that's your expectation, and doesn't actually come to fruition, you could get very discouraged and just give up. But if your expectation is like, hey, this is going to be long and hard, and I just have to continue to be diligent and stay after it, you're going to be less likely to be discouraged. Maybe here's a picture that kind of comes to my mind is if you think you're going to run a 5K, but really the track you stepped onto and the runners you stepped next to are running a marathon. If you're not mentally prepared for a marathon, you're mentally prepared for a 5K, you're going to give up right at the 6th or 7th or 8th kilometer. You're like, hey, I've already done my time.
Yeah.
So this stubborn resilience is this kind of ability to grind is like, it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, but this is God's work, right? God is strengthening me, and we're just going to continue day after day to go at it.
Yeah. I think maybe adding to that too, there's a sense of optimism there too. And I think because, there's things that can happen with a ministry that can just turn you into a complainer, or just always negative. And I think maybe this is leaning into is that perseverance, but the more of an optimistic perseverance instead of a pessimistic one. And
That's
I
really
think
good.
it's a key point that it's easy just in all the tension and all the chaos and all the volatility of just like, nope, long game. Like God is doing something here. I'm going to keep grinding, and he's going to keep building, as opposed to, I can't believe they're doing that, or this, or this, or this, or this. So I think that's maybe the heart of that resilience, maybe.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, you could maybe say a stubborn optimism.
There we go. Maybe that's better.
Well, or maybe it's like a divine optimism, right? This is recognizing that we're not approaching this from a human perspective and going to get discouraged by the potholes or the bumps or the discouragements along the way. But because we know God is building his church, we're just called to be faithful in that. And that is really the motivation behind that grind, that resilience is God doing the work. I just got to continue to be faithful.
Yeah.
That's all he's called me to do.
Yep. Third one, missionary lifestyle. I think it's kind of explanatory within the title, right? Of just recognizing as a planter, you are a missionary. And I think it's easy to maybe not think about that. And what we mean by that is that you just like every aspect of your life is you're seeking to build relationships. You don't compartmentalize things really very well. It's just like, man, if you're going to be out in the park, you are seeking to constantly build relationships. If you are coaching a team, if you are going to the same coffee shop every day, I mean, there's just going to the gym, whatever. There's a sort of a missionary idea there. You're not trying to hide. You're not trying to just sort of just focus on getting to the office and doing just the internal church thing. It's like you're seeing the world as your parish, right? Who was the guy who said that? It wasn't Wesley, was it? The world is my parish.
I don't remember. Sounds like Wesley.
I don't know. But yeah, that missionary lifestyle, it's just constantly looking for opportunity and waiting to meet people and tell them about Christ and about the church and the invitation, right? Well,
yeah. I think on that also, like you talked about earlier, these are on a spectrum.
Yep.
They're also not set in stone. I think this is probably one of this competency is probably one of the, I won't say misunderstood, but I think often people think with church planners is you have to be this like hyper evangelist. Like you're out every day knocking on doors, sharing the gospel, and that's good. Praise be to God. But I would also say if that's what every church planner has to be, I think very few people fall into that, have that gifting on that level. Really what we're getting at here is recognizing the whole point of planting a church. The entire point of planting a church is what? to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the point, right?
Yep.
To share the gospel and then disciple them to follow Jesus, the Great Commission.
Yeah.
That's why we're planting churches, right? We're not doing it for any other reason. So a person can be on a spectrum there. They don't even have to be like, man, I just love doing this every single day. It could be something where they discipline themselves to it. They're like, hey, this is uncomfortable. Yes, I do have a fear of man. And yes, it feels awkward. But because I love the gospel and I love Jesus and I love the people that Jesus loves, I'm going to go out and go do this really uncomfortable thing. That is something that a person can grow in as they practice it. Right. And you mentioned, some of the illustrations of it's not even necessarily knocking on doors. So that is often what it could look like. But just how are you going about your day-to-day life? Are you living it with that missionary mindset of I'm at the park with our kids? How do I go strike up a conversation with this person over here and get to know, what they do, and do they go to church in town? As I'm at the gym, do I build those relationships? So it's so much more expansive than just, are you willing to go, hey, do you know Jesus?
Right. For sure. Yep. Good. Team building. What is that, Matt? How does team building fit into this?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, because often people who are really high on that trailblazing kind of strength, their tendency can be to be loners. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is really important, is that they're like, I'm just going to go be a maverick. I'm going to be a loner. I'm going to go do it on my own. And the reality is, no church is built off of one person. Like, that's just not, that's not healthy ministry, right? It's not a New Testament description of what the church is. It's a body. It has many members that are all necessary for it to function in a healthy way. No one person can build a church by themselves. Like, that just, it's not possible.
Yeah.
You're always building on someone else's work, and you're always doing it in a team function. So for someone who is considering this call into church planting or even revitalizing, one of the competencies or strengths that they really need to have and be working on developing, if they feel like they're weak in it, is the ability to build teams, to interact with people with different personalities and different gifts, different convictions even, and communicating with them, hearing where they're at, understanding where they're at, and then being able to unify those various individuals towards a goal, right? A preferred future, if you will.
Yeah.
If a person can't do that, there's going to be a lot of conflict. You're not going to have the beauty and the power of having the entire body using their gifts towards that end. And I think ultimately you're not going to have a healthy church, right? And we're trying to plant healthy churches. So the ability to build a team, to be a team builder, is really foundational for church planting or revitalizing.
Yeah, that's really good. Good.
Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm just thinking, like the idea of creating a culture of unity, of going the same direction. And, that can play out in a lot of specificity as the church develops into systems and all the other things. But it just, in those first few years, again, of just building the people together and trying to capture all these people, like you mentioned, they come from all these different backgrounds, right? And different giftings and different skill sets and different histories and different stories, and getting them together and navigating within that. I think that is a really key thing. And there's a lot of nuance that goes within that competency. Next one, visionary leadership. Just again, it's two things: leadership and then vision. Are you a person of vision? Like, can you see, like, and just are you able to, like, see what God would have in this situation? And then are you built to be a leader, or are you built to be more of a follower kind of a thing? And so visionary leadership, to see something in the future, a preferred future, and then be able to persuade people, like, this is what we want to do, and let's do this together, and this is how we're going to make this happen. Just a person of vision. I know sometimes, especially in the last 30, 40 years, sometimes that language can get really controversial, a vision casting leader and all that kind of stuff. But just like the idea of, where is God taking us? What kind of church do we want to be? And how do we get there? And this is how we're going to do this together. This is connected to all the other ones, right? The missionary, the team building. But a man of vision, people want to follow. A leader that can lead going forward. That's really attractive. It's really important. If you are not a man of vision, no one's going to follow you. And I think this is maybe a good place to talk about just our current society, right? In the past, maybe, well, not maybe, for sure. Within church planting at different iterations, a lot of it was sort of a reassembly of people maybe leaving churches. And so you started with kind of an idea of what is the church, and we have this sort of group unity already. And so as the pastor came in, it was just like, all right, boom, we just start doing church and we're good to go. And we already know what church is, and we're good to we're fine. That really doesn't happen much anymore. You are dealing with people from every background under the sun, and you have got to be able to put together a compelling vision for the beauty of the congregation and what is the kingdom of God, and what is God trying to do, and what would He want to do in us through His Word and sacraments, and to just have that compelling vision. People want that. What would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And I think, again, we've all experienced, being part of, whether it's a church or an organization that has a vision that's leading it and uniting it. And that's the thing, a vision, it unites people,
Right.
but it also motivates people.
Yep.
It protects from discouragement. And there's so many different, we'll have to do another podcast in the future, like the role of vision. And it's not always super easy. Some people it more intrinsically comes to, and they communicate it. Others really have to work at it in understanding, well, what is a vision and how do I communicate that? But it functions in some really important ways. So again, just like an awareness, this is probably are you aware of what this is, and do you have some proclivities to think in these visionary ways?
Yeah.
Again, the word we use here is a pure preferred future.
Yeah.
Are you able to kind of look into the future and say, well, what is possible? We have 3 families, who want to start a church here. Well, what's possible? We could be a church of, a healthy church around God's word and sacrament, gathering every Sunday and serving each other and serving the community and sharing the gospel. That's vision, is what that is.
Yeah.
What would a healthy, free Lutheran church look like in this community?
Yeah.
That's vision. And then being able to communicate that and celebrate that and help then those congregants recognize that their role, and I think kind of tying into team building of achieving that.
Yeah, for sure. I just, not to belabor this, is thinking that this is really applicable just to the people that you're trying to reach at initial church plants. I remember so many conversations with people in that first year or two of trying to share, this is where we're going, this is what we're trying to do. Join us. It's not here right now, but this is, be a part of this vision. And for some people are like, I don't see it, but I'm excited about it. I'm going to jump in and get my hands dirty. For others are like, no, thanks. I want a perfectly packaged church already. And so I think even in your launch teams and that initial year or two, you also need people, a vision to join you to see what can be here, not what is. And so it's the key thing.
Yeah. Arguably, that's the most. I mean, you need it all the time, but it's an absolute necessity in those first couple years, depending upon how many people you're starting with.
Right.
But if you're starting with very few people, and there's you got nothing,
Right.
You got a couple metal folding chairs, a little table for an altar, and that's all you got.
Yeah.
That's not very appealing to people, right? They don't see a lot there. But if you can talk about the future, like what you what God is wanting to do in that church, again, just biblical things. We're not talking about dreaming something up in your sleep. It's just painting a picture of the New Testament church and what that could look like here. That's vision.
Yeah. Yep.
What about the next one? Flexible and adaptable.
Flexible and adaptable, man. I remember all my missionary training years and years ago. I remember Pastor Dick Gunderson always just hammering this. You got to be flexible. You got to be flexible. You got to be flexible. And just talking about just the nature of missionary life it's volatile. Things change. Things are constantly moving. And you just have to just learn how to live in that tension and be flexible and adaptable. And for some people, they're really wired to thrive in that. And for others, it drives them crazy. They need something predictable, right? And this is maybe one of those things that is very obvious in the way, as you think about how you're built, is like, do I thrive in volatility and constant change, or does it irritate me, and do I not do well in it? Because within church planting, you have to be flexible and are constantly just dealing with the unknown. I mean, what would you add to that?
Yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit later on, but I want to mention it here because as you're mentioning that, it comes to me. We're going to talk later on maybe about like the dark side to some of
Oh,
these.
right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But the flexibility I can think of also, kind of the downside to that could be a planter unwilling to put systems in place.
Yeah.
He just wants to kind of do whatever he wants to do all the time and not submit himself to a system.
Mm-hmm.
That could be someone who's really high on flexibility. They're like, I don't want any restraints, right? And that would be an unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, like in a church plant situation, you don't have systems often, right? You don't have people doing things early on. So you have to recognize like, all right, here's our ideal, here's our vision, and we're going to work towards it.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be willing and okay when it doesn't go well.
Right.
When the music was horrible, when, the building was locked when we showed up, when the power goes out, when your altar blows over because it's too windy, when, musicians don't show up, all those different factors, right? When your printer breaks down for your bulletins and you can't lose your cool. You got to be like, right, Lord, and this is your church and we're doing all we can do. Because those are going back to that resiliency. Those are things that you will have a lot of. And if you're not resilient and don't have that grit, those will cause you to lose heart, right? And Paul talks about this, like, don't lose heart. Keep prodding on. So that flexibility and adaptability, in some ways, that connects to that ability to grind and to work hard as well.
For sure. Relationship skills, next one. Why would that matter, Matt? And how is that different? How is that different just in general pastoral ministry? Like, what's this about?
Yeah. Well, so we're in the people business, right? That's what we do. We're in the soul business. If we are called to care for souls and care for sheep and care for people, right? God's children. It's all people business. So if a person doesn't like people or is unwilling to really show love for people, right? And this goes back to like evangelism. You can recognize that something is not necessarily your strength, but you're willing to discipline yourself to that. There are so many things in life that I don't enjoy doing, but I know they're important and I discipline myself to that. And I think these relational skills can be that of recognizing, well, maybe you do prefer sometimes like maybe fewer relationships, but are you willing to discipline yourself to build other relationships, to talk to new people, to reach out and get to know them? I think to your question, how is this different from like that gospel posture, like really trying to reach people for Jesus? This probably gets a little bit more into what we call EQ, emotional intelligence. Are you able to navigate the complexities of human interactions and not just kind of fly off your handle when someone offends you? Not to, become angry. Of course, these are basic qualifications for a pastor anyway.
Yeah.
But be able to relate to people where they are, various backgrounds, various communication styles, to humbly, graciously serve them and lead them where they are. Relational skills. You would think every pastor would have this, but there is definitely kind of a spectrum there. And in church planting, again, if you're not higher on this, then you will be signing yourself up for just like a lot more conflict in the church plant setting.
Yeah. Maybe just an observation I'm thinking real quick here is, you mentioned earlier that this is just one list. There are other lists too, but I can think of a lot of pastors who are not planters that are incredible with relationship skills, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to say, like, there are a lot of people that might have some of these gifts really, really high, and yet others maybe not so high, and that maybe would have them be more of, I'm just really okay always serving, more gifted in an established congregation. And so it's not one of those things where, because of thinking of Pastor X or whatever as this incredible emotional intelligence, relational person, but maybe he's not a vision guy at all. Maybe he's not like this missionary flexible, but he's so relational. So I think that's, you're wanting to see the whole picture here, not just take one out. I think that's important.
Well, yeah. And honestly, I mean, even to press that point further, often the pastors who are the settlers are incredibly high on this. The pastors that I can think of in our AFLC, that they've been in pastoral ministry 30, 40 years, faithfully serving churches, never in a church plant situation. They would rate like a 99 out of 100.
For sure.
on this, right? That's what has made them such incredible shepherds, because they're willing to sit with the sheep and hear the sheep and relate to the sheep, right? So if anything, what we're saying with this is, don't be the maverick church planter that think you don't need, you can't, you don't have to do that anymore, right? In some ways, this is less about, again, the church planter somehow like the super pastor. In some ways, we're saying this isn't the place you get to come and not willingly lay down your life to spend time with the sheep. Like, if that's what you want to do, like, this is not for you.
Yeah.
So if anything, this is still really, really, really important in a church plant situation as well.
Yeah, communication skills is the next one. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, every pastor, you're always preaching and teaching, and that's a skill that you're always seeking to improve. And it's not like you get through seminary and you're good to go the rest of your life. Like, every single pastor out there needs to put the work in to constantly improve their craft at preaching and teaching and all that kind of stuff, right? And so that's just kind of a general thing. When I think of this concept of communication skills, I'm thinking specifically the audience, right? And I think, within maybe more of an established congregation, you have maybe more of a homogenous identity. You have a more homogenous history. People kind of think similar. Maybe they believe similar things. Within a church plant, that's not really the case, especially in those first few years where you're getting everybody under the sun and it's super eclectic. And you might have people that are incredibly brilliant and really well versed in one area of a different thing. Maybe they don't think the way you do about soteriology or the sacraments or something else. And so part of this communication skills, and again, this is maybe similar to emotional intelligence, is like just reading the room and knowing how to communicate within this very eclectic environment without compromising your doctrine, but also not unnecessarily offending people and just like pushing people out. And so it's kind of an interesting dance within this communication. So we're not just simply talking about, well, you need to speak well. That is an important point. When you are trying to start something from nothing, if you do not have speaking gifts, it's going to be really hard, because if a person doesn't have any sort of brand loyalty, which most people don't have anymore, why would they choose to come to a church where maybe there's not a compelling message being shared, right? With excitement and joy and skill and passion and all those things. So, I mean, the communication thing is really important, but so there's that side of it, but I'm also thinking like the audience here of just navigating within that eclectic environment with integrity and grace as well. And what do you think about when you think communication?
Yeah, I think, to put a point on it, I think that the preaching is such a fundamental. Again, this is, every pastor is called to this, to faithfully preach the word, to teach right doctrine, to correct false doctrine. That's every pastor. But in a church plant context, it's especially important. And the good news is we all can grow in it, right? Hopefully we're getting better at the longer we're in ministry. But it does take intentionality, right? It takes time, effort, getting feedback, learning more about how to improve in that, doing the hard work of shaping and writing our sermons. Like, all that's really hard and difficult. And sometimes, some are going to be better than others. Right. That's just the way it is. But I would say, like, part of this is there an upward trajectory? And, if you could rate, and this sounds like a very human thing to do, but I think if we're honest, we all know it. If you rate preachers on a scale of 1 to 10, pastors, where do you think you are? And what do you think it would take for you to go up a number, right? If you're like, hey, I think I'm a 5, well, what's it look like to become a 6?
How do I get better? Yeah.
Yeah, how do I get a little bit better? And every one of us can do that in that. So I think that's just being really honest about that, right? And getting feedback from people saying, hey, what do you feel like I could, am I too long-winded here? Am I, do I talk too much about, the textual details in the Greek, and I need to talk more about the theology or the application, right? Do I talk too much about application? I need to spend more time in the text. Like, getting that honest feedback from other pastors even, and that's a great, just practical, send them 3 sermons and say, what are 1 or 2 things that you think I could do to improve on these? What a super practical thing to do to continue improving on that.
That's really good. All right, number 9, spousal cooperation. I cannot overestimate how important this is. I think sometimes in ministry, I remember back in seminary, the constant message that I heard is the wife is not called to serve the church. You are called as the pastor. Your wife is not called to pastor.
Hmm.
And there's certainly truth to that. I don't know how true that is within a church planting context. Certainly, as you talk about vocations and titles, obviously the man is a pastor and all that kind of stuff. But man, if the wife is not on board as like an equal participant in so many parts of the ministry, it's not going to work, period. And I think back in our situation, like my wife is like the superpower for me, right? Of just being able to do all these things that I could never do. But the bigger thing is like, it's just a team. So it's not just me trying to plant a church. It's like us together. We are a team constantly working. I know that she is just as in as I am, and maybe our roles are going to look differently, but this is a huge thing. So if you're thinking about like, does God call me to plant? Well, is your wife on board? Is she passionate about this? Is she called to do this? And does she understand the incredible sacrifice it's going to take and the strain it's going to be on your marriage, on your family, on your life? And is she on board with that? And if she is, that is a gift from God that you should never, ever ignore. So yeah, spousal cooperation, huge. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say 2 levels to this. One, it's their support of you as a pastor, right?
Yeah.
Because like, yes, the wife's not called to do the preaching and the teaching.
Right.
Like this is,
Of course.
so is she supportive of you and recognizing, like you said, the stress that's going to bring, the time.
Right.
But then the second level is, what is her willingness to engage in the life of the church as well?
Right.
And I think we see these extremes. Or on one hand, we see in some churches where the pastor's wife is expected to do everything, right?
Yeah.
She's playing the organ, leading the Sunday school, and we've kind of like, in some ways, in a healthy way, swung out of that and said, okay, the wife's can't do everything. We need the body of Christ. But the other extreme is the wife who just wants to say, like, well, my husband's already making enough sacrifices. I make enough sacrifices just supporting him. Therefore, I'm not going to do anything, right? And sadly, there are many pastors' wives who have that reputation in churches as well. They're unfriendly. They're not getting to know the new women. They kind of just do their own little thing, right? So there's extremes here in this.
Yep.
So I mean, man, this is something that Natalie and I had to really like work through a lot, both when we were discerning to plant. I remember the couple of years that we were like praying through this. We had a lot of conversations about like, what is, because when we were before at Abiding Savior, she wasn't as involved in the church. It was a multiple staff, large established, a lot of wonderful lay leaders we had. So she just wasn't as necessary.
Yeah.
We had young kids, young family. And so we really had these long conversations over a long period of time, like, what is it going to look like? And, her praying through that and discerning in her heart, like, what is it going to look like? Talking to other planters' wives. And then the first couple of years of planting, especially just the stress that comes in that. And I mean, there was like, I had to also adjust my expectations of what she was able to do and not project on her unhealthy expectations.
Right.
So this is a really real thing, but I think at the foundation level, it's your wife has to support you. She also has to feel called into this. If she does not, resentment will grow. Satan will use that to draw a wedge between you and your wife, between your wife and the church, the bride of Christ, right? All unhealthy stuff. So she has to be on board with this as well. And that's why for like the assessment process, we want to bring the wife along as well.
Sure.
Is she the planter? No. Is she going to be spending, however many hours a week in the church, as much as you? No. But she has to have buy-in and willing to sacrifice for it as well.
Absolutely.
So, again, that's another whole like episode at some point. We got to get our wives on.
There we go.
And interview them. That'd be a fun thing to do.
That would be. Let's do
for
it.
sure. So, okay, last one. Emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
EQ. What is that?
Yeah, and you referenced this a little bit earlier, and this sort of plays into this whole thing, really. Just like, do you have just the innate ability to read a room and navigate all the different types of people and all the different types of issues and all the different types of statements and all these different things? Can you navigate that with wisdom, grace, and sensitivity and integrity, I think. And so I mean, I think we all know people like that just have this innate wisdom to them and this ability to handle situations. And we all know people that don't. They're like a bull in a china shop. And so I think this phrase EQ has kind of grown in popularity in the last 10, 20 years. But we all know instinctively what we mean by that, of just thinking through people being able to read a room and navigate. And I think as a church planner, given the volatility and all this eclectic background and all these different things, EQ is really important to know, just know how to work with people. Yeah. What would you add?
Yeah, no, same.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, let's keep going
stuff
here. I know we're getting a little bit long here, but I think it's important as we kind of go through that is just keep kind of talking about some of the danger or some of the observations or qualifications about this issue. And so let's talk about some dangers here. And again, going back to that sort of titles of pioneer settler, I think for pioneers, what are the dangers related to this issue?
Yeah, I would say every strength always has a dark side.
Yes.
And let's just being honest, like every strength has a dark side. So let's say those who are pioneers, or their strength is like taking risk. They don't need structure. They don't need someone telling them what to do. Well, what's the dark side to that? Well, they don't want to submit to structure. They don't want to submit to any type of feedback or correction. They, I don't hear this phrase as much anymore. But I remember, when we were first getting into planning, I heard often, in some circles, this idea of like a serial church planter. The idea that I'm going to plant a church for 4 years and move on to another one and move on to another one. And they would often say it's because I just can't settle. I get antsy and I just have to keep moving. And I'm not saying that's all bad. Certainly, Paul seemed like, missionary type, go serial church planter. Sure. My encouragement or kind of question would always be like, well, what's the motivation for it? Is the motivation because so much like of your identity has got wrapped up into this? Is it you don't want to submit to a system? Is it you don't want to do the hard work of sharing leadership, right? So motivation can come into play, and I think that's where you kind of get the dark side of some of this, is saying where is the Lord maybe wanting to sanctify you and your gifts in this as well. So I think for the pioneer, that would be some of the things. Yeah, what would you say?
Yeah, I'm just thinking some of the examples that I know of people in my life that are so incredibly built as pioneers. I can see this play out where, well, I don't want to do what maybe my board is wanting me to do, and so I'm just going to leave it and go start my own thing. I'm going to start my own thing constantly, and I'm going to be that Lone Ranger all the time. And start a new ministry and start this, start that, instead of dealing with just the harder work of development. And I think that's an inner pull for every pioneer. And so with all the incredible gifting, like you said, that's the temptation, right? Definitely.
Well, yeah, patience both to do the work on ourselves, to allow the Spirit to do the work on ourselves, our probably pride or ego or arrogance.
Yeah.
That long, patient work, but also the long, patient work of just shepherding people of the sin in the congregation's life, right? Those that we're called to serve.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways. It's in some ways, maybe the pioneers, maybe now as I'm thinking, it's patience.
Yeah. So
right? That they have to grow in patience, and that is like wanting to be anxious and force things. And I see this, man, definitely in even established churches. So they call a pastor who has a pioneer kind of spirit. And whether they're on the more maybe kind of say attractional side of things, they come into a church and the church says, we want to grow, we're dying. And this pioneer comes in and says, okay, here's what we got to do. And he puts this big plan together. We got to, modernize the worship, and we got to repaint the church, and we got to do a, balloon festival. Like he comes up with all these ideas, right? And the church doesn't want to do it, and he becomes frustrated, right? And then he has to force it and twist it, and fights break out, and church doesn't want to change. Well, maybe not that the church doesn't want to change. That could be it. Maybe it's just you're trying to go too fast, right? Or the other end of the spectrum where it's, kind of doctrinal purity. I'm going to come in and really make this church Lutheran. And same thing, fights break out. And, well, no, you got to be patient and shepherd and serve. That's what you're called to do. It's not to say necessarily the changes are wrong, but the speed in which you're trying to do the changes. You're doing it in a not a patient, long-suffering, gracious way.
So I wonder.
And I think pioneers can fall to that.
Yeah, just maybe I'm just thinking on the fly here. I think going back with the pioneer settler thing, the thing that maybe a settler fears is the beginning crazy volatility and unknown, starting something from nothing. The thing that settlers are built for and love is that ongoing rhythm of care, of shepherding, of preaching and teaching, right? And I wonder, with pioneers, the thing that they love and they're built for is the crazy and the volatility and all these things. And the thing that maybe they are innately more fearful of is the ongoing rhythms of care and shepherding and getting into the weeds, into the yuckiness of people, right? And so I wonder if that doesn't connect to this idea of serial planters. Like, hey, pioneers, we love starting something new. And so we're going to give 2, 3, 4, 5 years to this and boom, something else. Because we're afraid of getting into the weeds and in the deep, deep ugly of people's lives. And it's just kind of interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. How are we operating? Yeah. The possibility of operating out of fear.
Yeah.
Or is it kind of what you're getting at there? Yeah. So what about settlers? What is maybe the danger or the dark side, if you will, of settlers?
Yeah, I think, super contextual here, but if you have like a settler in an established congregation that is maybe wanting to pursue renewal, but the settler is like, hey, you know what? I'm not the missionary type. I'm not really that sort of out front person. I'm not really a vision kind of person, whatever. So I'm just going to kind of stay in my office and not do anything. I'm not going to lead. When your church actually needs you to lead with the gospel, lead in mission and lead with purpose and all these things. And sometimes we can use our wiring as an excuse to not do what we know we need to do. And I think that can happen very easily. And I think, honestly, another way for this to plays out is if a settler is put into a plant context and what happens, man, they're burned out and their family is hurt and the church is hurt. This is one of the things that I think people forget about here when they don't want to have this conversation is that people get hurt, right? People simply get hurt. They get burned out or the church gets hurt. And so what's kind of interesting about this is a pioneer put into an established church possibly can burn the church out, and a settler put into a planting church can possibly be burned out themselves. So you have both temptations are real here in a sense of not having a good chemistry fit or not having the sensitivity to want to grow in all the giftings that are necessary to just be the best pastor in that context. What would you add?
Yeah, no, all excellent points there. Yeah. And I guess maybe that idea that, having a good, honest assessment and then recognizing that a person can grow, right? And it's case by case, right? Every situation is going to look a little bit different, right? The type of plant, the type of revitalization, the type of established church, because they're always going to be facing different challenges in that season of the life of the church. And even as our culture grows, like as city, I think of some church plants that have happened that I know one planter that I got to know where he went to plant in a new city, really shepherding, just really gifted, different tradition than ours, really gifted shepherd. And they ministered for, I don't know how many years, trying to get a church off the ground in one city. They couldn't get it off. There was conflict. They couldn't get momentum. They weren't getting enough people. He goes to another city, not that many, maybe 6, 7 hours away. And within a couple of years, it's a small kind of dying church, kind of revitalization. The church now is flourishing within a couple of years. It's like, well, what was the difference there? Well, part of it was his gifting. That was part of it, was he was more situated to be more of a shepherd type than like a raw kind of church planter type. But part of it was just the context where the people in this other city, it was just the iron was kind of red for striking, if you will. And he was attracting people, part of his tradition in there. So it's so interesting to see how you could have apparent failure in one situation and you put that very same planter or pastor in another situation and the Lord really uses it. So what we're saying in all of this is it's not always this perfectly black and white where hey, you have all these and it's guaranteed success. There's no guarantees in this, right? It's the Lord who builds, and we need to have sensitivity to the Spirit's work in our lives and the opening and closing of doors as He leads, right? So
I think that's a really good way to bring the conversation all the way back to those 4 C's. Because you're talking about calling, character, the chemistry, like you just mentioned chemistry there, of the fit, of the people, of all these different things, and competency. All these are things that we want synergy on And we often will get into trouble if we maybe say, oh, we got 3 out of 4. That's okay. Good enough. Or we're setting ourselves up for failure when we're not pursuing all of these and wanting to grow in these things. And so, yeah, super contextual, really, really good conversation. Okay, so let's say you're a church planter, or you're a prospective church planter, Matt. Maybe you're serving in a church as a pastor right now. Maybe you're in seminary. Maybe you're in Bible college. You don't know. But you said, man, I love mission. This sounds like maybe God has something for me. How do you discern your wiring? Like, how do you discern your competency? What are some ways in which maybe that you can go about doing this?
Yeah, good, super good question. Well, keep listening to this podcast. Listen to Church Planting Podcast. That's a really good thing, right? Having conversations with your spouse and with those that you minister with. We also in Home Missions have built assessment processes. So we have questionnaires and personalities assessments. We when people come and they go through that process, one of the steps that not everyone goes to this one, but as we're kind of developing them, we'll go to an assessment, like a week-long church planting intensive, where it's not a guarantee that they're going to come out as a planter, but it's part of that process of them being assessed. So we have a lot of resources and tools that we have developed as a home missions department because we are really passionate about trying to help align and point pastors and missionaries and planters to the place where they can exercise those gifts in the most fruitful possible way. But with that also, it's not an all or nothing thing. And I think that is also the trap that we can fall into is I have all of it or none of it. And that's just not true either. That's kind of a lie of Satan, but that you can grow. Paul tells Timothy to stir up the gifts, to fan the flames of the gifts that he has been given, which means the Spirit gave some gifts, right, on the laying on of hands. They're uniquely spiritual gifts that he was given, but he was encouraged to develop those, to grow those, to fan that flame. And that's the encouraging thing in all of this, because I don't have them all, you don't have them all. We have weaknesses galore, right? But by God's grace, we can fan those into flame, right? So I said that to any pastor, anyone interested in planting. Let's have a conversation. Come reach out to Home Missions. If you're just interested in kind of going through the assessment process, you will benefit from that process, just getting to know yourself and your gifts and strengths and where you can grow as you go through that process.
And that's exactly right. I was thinking that too. It's like every pastor really could have value in being assessed, because really the point of the assessment is just to pinpoint areas that you are strong in and areas that you can grow in. And so if you come through the assessment and like, man, I really need to grow in these 3 areas, well, then you figure out what's your growth plan and you push into those areas. And by doing that, you're going to be a better pastor, regardless of your context. And so assessment is such a valuable tool that that we can help you with. So if you're interested, we would love to work with you. Well, I think that's enough for today, Matt. Thanks for joining us, audience. And we'd love to have your help again with this podcast. I know it's been a couple months since we've been on, but try to be more consistent as we have a lot more to get to in this season on blueprints. But take a moment, subscribe to it, share this with others. We'd love to have your help on that. And if you are interested in learning more, just exploring the concepts of church planting, come and talk to us and contact us at aflchomemissions.org. See you next time.